Hey Woodhaven family, and welcome back to the Journey 24/7 podcast. Today we are going to continue our study in Exodus, jumping into chapter 20. And this is a chapter that you're probably very familiar with. Even if it's not one that you've studied directly through a lot, you are at least familiar with the concepts talked about here when we see the Ten Commandments. And so we're going to be looking at those today and how the Lord delivered those, and then also really break down what they mean and the importance behind them, and how we can live them out today. And so we open up this chapter, and again it opens up with, "And God spoke all these words." Reminder that God is the one speaking here, and that his words should carry extreme weight. And so he opens up this by first reminding Moses who he is. He says, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." So he's reminding Moses who he is, he's reminding Moses of what he's done, and he's showing that there's this covenant relationship, and the Lord has delivered. Remember, we go back to that covenant all the way back, looking in Genesis with the covenant God makes with Abraham, or Abram at the time, where he tells him about how great his offspring are going to be, and he talks about they'll be greater than even the stars in the sky. And we remember that there's that covenant where they're walking through the animals that were split in half. But Abraham wasn't the one that walked through. It was God that walked through, because he said, "I'm going to be the one that takes on the punishment." And that was pointing us to the cross. And so we've seen this covenant language all throughout the Old Testament, and we'll see it all throughout Scripture. And so we're seeing here just where the Lord is reminding Moses of what he's done. And so he opens up, and the very first commandment he gives is, "You shall have no other gods before me." You shall have no other gods before me. Now, he's talking most likely here about actual gods, and what plays into the next one we're going to look at in just a second, because we know there were multiple lower G gods that people served. And you notice here in the scriptures, this gods is lower G because the Father, Lord Yahweh, is the only true capital G God. But back in these times, there were lots of lowercase gods that people would create, and they would serve, and they would think had all these powers. When no, only God is powerful. Only Yahweh is powerful. Now, I think we could also relate this to us today, in that we don't necessarily serve other created gods that we think are on the level of a god. But in our time and in our actions, we do serve things other than God. Many times, the things around us, like work or family or sports, can become a god. And you can fill in the blank. You know in your head the things you struggle with. And we say that they become a god. Again, it's not that we literally are worshiping them, thinking that they are this all-powerful thing. But when we look at our time and we look at our efforts, those things a lot of times see a lot more of our time and effort than our relationship with God does. And so therefore we turn it into something that is more impactful in our day-to-day life than our relationship with the Lord. And therefore we make it a god in our life. Then the next one is, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God." That's a word that we don't think to use to describe God often. Jealous, because we have a very negative connotation with the word jealous. But what we have to recognize is that God has the right to be jealous of anything that we put before him, because he knows that he is who needs to be first in our lives. He knows that he is perfect, that he is all-knowing and all-powerful. You see, we don't have the right to be jealous over something in our lives. We don't have the right to be jealous over something somebody else has, or the way somebody is towards someone else, because we're not perfect. We are sinful creatures. But God has the right to be jealous. And it's more than just that he has the right to be a jealous God. It's also that he knows it's the best for us. The best thing for his creation, for mankind, is to follow after him and to put him first. And he knows that. So when he's a jealous God, yes, it's that he deserves to be first in our life. He deserves to be the one and only that we serve. But he also wants the best for us. And he knows the best for us is to follow after him. God always wants the best for us, and he knows that's to follow after himself. Next, we see that you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. Okay, this is one that we see a lot around us now. This is partly maybe using the Lord's name and to invoke a false promise, but it's also just to use the Lord's name very casually and flippantly. Think about how often we hear that. Think about how often we may struggle with that ourselves, where we use the Lord's name in vain in some way, where we just are very flippant about it. There's nothing about God that's flippant. He deserves our absolute respect, our absolute honor, and our absolute reverence. We should never be just flippant about him or his existence. God is so good to us. Let's make sure we remember that. Then remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Have that seventh day of rest and focus on the Lord. The Lord's day. Next we see honor your father and your mother. Now, honor your father and mother, that's one that can be difficult for us sometimes. We know for kids that's a little bit easier. It's a little more black and white. As long as your parents are giving you instruction that is not sinful, you follow their instruction and you honor them in that. As adults, honoring your father and mother can be a little more difficult because it's not that they get to still set all of the rules of your life, but what they do deserve is our respect. And so when your father and mother, when they maybe have a different viewpoint from you, or they maybe have a different direction they would want you to go in life, you don't have to follow what they say, but it's being respect and showing them honor in it, even when you disagree. This also can play into the role of, as parents are aging, just showing them honor in that and taking care of them in the best ways that you can. You know, we said earlier that we are to only serve the Lord, and that's true, but part of serving the Lord is serving other people, because he has called us to do that, and honoring your father and mother is serving them, showing them that respect. Now, the next three that we see are a little more just straightforward, and they're just pretty practical things. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, and you shall not steal. These are basic standards that God is establishing for his kingdom. I think we would all agree that these are all pretty straightforward and pretty agreed upon even by the world. The world would say that you shall not murder, commit adultery, or steal. Now, we know the world's going to also glorify these things at times. We see on TV where these things are glorified. But these are overall pretty agreed upon moral truths even by a lot of the people in the world around us. And it's because God has wired us to see right and wrong. He's wired us to recognize sin. So even though they recognize it, the world still at times glorifies it. Now, we also have to remember the words of Jesus, where he compares murder to anger, committing adultery to lust, and how if we are burning in anger against someone, or if we are having lustful thoughts about someone, we are really committing murder and adultery in our hearts. And so we must recognize that we may think that murder is not something that we struggle with, but if we struggle with anger towards someone that is an unrighteous anger, in our hearts we struggle with that. So yes, the implications here on earth are different, because obviously being angry with someone versus murdering them, extremely different implications on earth. But in our heart, they're both still sinful. So we must make sure we're addressing that and not just glancing over these because we think, oh, we don't struggle with murdering someone. No, we must still think about how our heart is. Because the Lord doesn't just call us to not sin outwardly, but he also calls us to not sin inwardly. So we want to make sure that those thoughts that we're having are not sinful thoughts. And that when they do come in, that we fight them with Scripture. That we wage war against that sin. Next, we see that you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Okay, this is implying here typically a trial where you're bearing witness, but I think we could also apply it to our lives because we know it lines up with the rest of God's commands, that we're not gossiping, we're not creating up things about people around us. We're not spreading those things. No, we only tell the truth. And then lastly, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. You see, this idea of coveting something that's your neighbor oftentimes would lead to things that we see above, like murder or theft. And so it was a way that it would allow these other sins in. But it also was just recognizing when you covet something so badly that you're not satisfied with the Lord. You see, it's not wrong for us to have desires. In fact, we are to bring our desires to the Lord. But what's wrong is when we let those desires take hold in our hearts and become bigger than our contentment in the Lord. It's not wrong to desire something. It's not wrong for somebody to desire to be married. But it's wrong if their contentment comes from being married. Their contentment comes in the Lord. It's not wrong to desire to move up in your job, in your career. But it's wrong if that's where our contentment comes from, or if we're sinning to get there. You see, desires by themselves are not wrong. But what is wrong is to desire things that are directly your neighbor's. While it's not wrong to desire to be married, it is wrong to desire to take your neighbor's spouse. You see, there's a difference here. Desires in and of themselves are okay when they're in the right context. The Lord wants us to bring them to Him, but also recognize that, Lord, if you don't give me this desire, that's okay because I'm content in you. Again, we see this modeled by Jesus. He desired for the cup, for what he was going to go and experience on the cross to be taken from him. But what does he say? Not my will, Lord, but yours. Because he desired God's will ultimately over any other earthly desire. So we can want things, we can desire things, but we must also recognize that God's will is greater. And we ultimately desire to serve him and to love him and to worship him and to glorify him. That's going to wrap us up for today. We'll see you back here next week as we jump into Exodus chapter 21. You'll have a great weekend, and we will see you Sunday.